Welcome, everybody. I know it's sometimes difficult to get here right at 5:30, but I appreciate you guys being here. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, March and the leprechauns and St. Patrick's Day and the luck of the Irish versus the legislative ideas behind what is going on with the idea of getting rid of property taxes here in the state of Florida. So when I first heard this topic over a year ago, I thought, okay, it's just some kind of political gimmick, that sort of thing. And in actuality, it turned out it wasn't a gimmick at all. So I was the only property manager from Southwest Florida to go up to Tallahassee for what we call Legislative Day. That's where our property managers across the state get together, go to Tallahassee to talk to our state representatives, our state senators about some ideas and current legislation for property managers, for landlords, realtors, that sort of stuff. And I had a great experience where the night before we went to visit all the elected officials, the chief financial officer for Florida came in and talked to us about this idea. So here's some of my notes. I did more research into it and so forth, including I brought in even stuff today for this presentation to bring it up to date. So I hope you guys enjoy it. It was a fascinating topic I found because really it's a lot about affordable housing. And if that's not just a buzzword, but they were legitimately talking about it in the state of Florida. So real quickly, what Parrish talked about before. Thank you for the introduction, Parrish, because a lot of people don't know me. That I sit, for instance, on a national finance board and so forth. Nationally, and I'm the only property manager that does that at the national level. So I've also been involved with the local property management board for over 25 years. So, like it said here, like a lot of the people that are on our new local board, they're like brand new people, like, a year or two or something like that. I've sat on the local board for 25 years. But the thing I'm really excited about, just to bring people up to date, was, and again, people like Parrish and our property managers like Ed and Dan, Natalie and Daniel, and also our maintenance coordinators, Carmen and Yilda and Francis at the front desk, and Mary Wilson, who does a lot of our business development. We were recently ranked number one by not just one, but two separate entities, Business Rate and PropertyManagement.com. Had a chance to kind of survey a little bit of some of our clients that took the time to speak with me. Really, really excited about it. And also that we're the only nationally certified management company in Southwest Florida. So just wanted to give you that background because a lot of people don't know about it. We're really excited about it. And thank you again for my staff that does a great job getting us there. So thank you, Parrish. Okay, so today, main points. What are we talking about today? So first of all, like I said, it's all about affordable housing, this talk. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the importance of property taxes on our expenses, right? And I'm going to give you a real example of what that looks like, okay? And then also, to what extent, like, are they serious? Like, is this kind of like weird talk? What are they actually doing with property taxes? Are they actually going to eliminate it for everyone in the state of Florida? Who else is going to be involved, kind of like in this situation? Okay, and the next thing also is, what has been proposed and where are we today? Okay, so like, and legitimately, like I said, I brought a slide in today. I did some research, stuff that's happened even less than a week ago regarding this sort of thing for property taxes and other things. And then also, where do we stand to some extent on insurance? Okay, so are there things being done in the state of Florida given this idea and drive behind affordable housing, right? So, like I said, a lot of people talk about it. It's like a political buzzword. It seems that we always have elections going on. It doesn't matter what year it is and that sort of stuff. But the question is how does the state of Florida create housing that's more affordable, whether you're talking about people purchasing it to live in it or also having it as rental investments, right? Which is where we kind of come in. Because the real estate market, whether you're talking about the national level or the state level, is a huge part of our economy. So something that I got to today, and I'm not sure, since like Parrish mentioned, I am a client, I'm a landlord here in Southwest Florida, and I don't know if you can relate to this. So I got this today from some of the many blogs that I read, and it's talking about New York City. Okay. Now, New York's going to, occupy a little bit of this presentation because we want to show you a little bit of the differences between Florida and New York. So this is talking about the city of New York, not the state. And what's interesting is that they have rent control. Okay, so what that means is that they have a board that can determine how much your rent can increase. Okay, it's not like a free market like we have in the state of Florida. So what I did here is I highlighted a whole bunch of different things here. Where, for instance, the rent guideline boards in the city of New York talked about last year that the property taxes rose 3.9%, that the insurance costs in the last 6 years in the New York City area rose by 150%, that maintenance costs climbed in the last 6 years almost 40% to 39, and utilities were up 31%. Okay, so this is the state of New York, how we see the property taxes going up, the insurance costs going up, the maintenance costs going up, and the utility costs going up. And on top of that, just to show you how important property taxes are, Mayor Mondani, who's new there, he's had a lot of press about him. He proposed another 9.5% property tax increase if the state of New York doesn't tax corporations more and the wealthy, whatever that term means, more. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can kind of relate to that here in Southwest Florida, where not so much the surging of maintenance and so forth, but the idea that even though we don't have rent control, that in a down market, it feels like that to me and our property managers and our clients, where we can't kind of raise our rents up because there's so much inventory on the market, and yet property taxes, property insurance, that sort of stuff is all going up, also maintenance, right? So let me give you a practical example of what I mean by that and what the state of Florida is concerned about when it comes to affordable housing. So what I did was I took one of my own rental properties and I did like a deep dive analysis on this, okay? So, first of all, this information that I'm giving to you happened after, if you recall, the real estate collapse in our area and in Florida and also nationally. So this is after the 2007 to 2000 kind of 10 years where like in our area, like real estate went down by 40%. So what I did was on this side over here, I put PI, the principal and interest on the loan. Okay, so normally people have a fixed unless it's like an adjustable rate mortgage, but normally somebody might buy a rental property with a 15-year or 30-year fixed mortgage. That means that it's going to be the same every month. And that's what I did. I amortized the payments over a year, or basically multiply the monthly payments by 12. And then here are the taxes in this column C. So you can see in 2011, it starts off at a 981 taxes for the year. Hopefully, you guys would appreciate that if you had it today, right? And then I had another category for the insurance. What did I actually pay insurance only for my property? I don't have outrageous insurance or something like that. I have regular insurance for my property. And then I put them both together, the taxes and the insurance together, and also what percentage does that show? So when you start off with taxes, you'll see every year for this one particular rental property of mine, it goes up. Every year it goes up all the way till like last year, basically, where it went down because the property taxes reflect to some extent what happens in the area. Okay, now I can answer that at the end. I don't want to get sidetracked here, but you'll notice the insurance, it starts off in 2011 at $1,037 for the year. It keeps going up every single year till basically till this year, 2025. The last one I paid, it's at $3,291. So over the 14 years, my insurance as a landlord tripled. Okay, so this bears out in the percentage. So when we're talking about affordable housing, and we're going to talk about what that does, like in the free market with people buying it, but this is what the state of Florida is looking at. And they're saying, well, wait a second, property taxes and insurance have a tremendous effect on homeowners as well as investment property. And here, when you're looking at this chart, it starts off, my taxes and insurance start off at less than 20% of the overall cost of my property at 19.4% in 2011. And look where it is last year, it was at 60%. So it's almost getting to the point where my principal and insurance is the same as my property taxes and insurance. Okay. And then last year it went down. Now, again, the insurance didn't go down, but the property taxes, right? Okay. So, again, this information happens right after the collapse in 2027, or about, sorry, 2007 to 2010. And then that's why you see these values very, very low. Okay. So here's the interesting thing. If I did not have a mortgage, okay, when you look at this information, last year I would have been paying over $500 a month on a single family home for property taxes and insurance. This is exactly what the state of Florida is looking at. Okay, so what happens when this sort of thing starts to happen? You start having where we can't adjust the market rent necessarily all the time based on what happens with the property taxes and the insurance. They're different variables, right? So here I wanted to give you something from RealPage. It talks about Tampa, and it shows here this little blue line that talks about year over year at the national level. And you can see at the national level, the rent is down by about maybe 1%. But when you look at Tampa, if you're a Tampa landlord, look at how in the last 6 months, everything's collapsed to 6%. So even though the insurance doesn't go down, and sometimes the property taxes might go down a little bit, for a lot of my rental properties, it didn't go down at all. In fact, it increased just a little bit. It doesn't matter because, again, when rent is going down, we're feeling the pinch, okay? And what this does is, like in an area like Tampa or an area like us, it affects a lot of the investing in the area, that people say, well, I can't invest in that area because I can't make any money, and it affects it for years to come, right? So this affects everything. And then when you look into our local economy, again, just by RealPage, they were talking about February. They talk about, once again, here's Cape Coral and Fort Myers, once again, being in the big three or tied for first nationally, unfortunately, where they're talking about how the rents are sliding, okay? And Florida is very well aware of what this is doing. And I'm not going to spend time on our local area that much. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to do the first quarter analysis that I normally do for 2026. I'll do that, maybe a Zoom session, or I'll just do a video and so forth. So how do we get to more affordable housing? So the first thing that we look at is sales price, okay? Let me pause there for a second. Is there any questions you want me to answer or something like that? And I'll get into the property taxes.
Brian actually just commented on other than taxes and insurance, the mortgage rates actually do have a big part in that affordable housing equation. So
Yeah,
he threw that in there too.
absolutely. So this is exactly right. So when you're looking at buying, and this is where I talk about sales price to start with, right? That has a huge effect on whether you're going to invest more in real estate, whether you're going to even buy to live there, a second home, that sort of stuff. So sales price is very accurate, just like Brian's saying, and we're going to talk about that. So the sales price in an area, doesn't matter where you are, really has to do with a lot of supply and demand issues, right? Where, as opposed to something like insurance that can be affected by hurricanes, property taxes, where, if the values go up, great. But here it is, we're talking about sales price. So the goal always is to have affordable housing. Everybody always says that. But the problem is that in the United States right now, as well, maybe a little less now because our prices are going down, but it's not affordable. Okay. So the goal nationally or in any area is for people to spend about 30% of their income on where they stay, whether that's a rental property, whether they're purchasing it for themselves, that sort of thing. Okay, but right now it isn't nationally. I did this a couple of months ago when I sat with the representative from the Fed that was a speaker, and they said nationally it's 41%. So people use 41% nationally to either buy with their mortgage payment, their property taxes and insurance, or rentals. They're spending like 41% of their income on rentals. So they're saying it's too high. That's why you hear this constant talk about, well, you know what, affordability wise and stuff like that, we need to build more homes. So here's the thing, we're not where we are. And they have talked about increasing supply, actually, increasing supply through a couple of different ways. Again, I don't want to get into that too much, but they're talking about like deregulating and trying to make the regulations simpler to build, as well as just kind of preventing some institutional investors, those that are kind of like 100 or more properties, and that from buying a lot of properties in a down market so they can hold it, and this way it crowds out people from buying properties, that sort of thing. Okay, so that's the sales side of things. Like, so one thing we can do to make things more affordable is obviously build more properties and that sort of stuff, right? Okay, now next thing is though, what do we do with our property taxes? So when we talk about property taxes, most people don't actually understand what we actually use property taxes for. So, isn't property taxes at a county level? Why on earth would the state of Florida technically get involved in a local issue, right? So first of all, the average property tax right now in Lee County is close to $2,200 a year for a home value of just over 200,000, like 210,000. And I don't break it down if you're tax exempt or anything else like that. That's just the going rate. And basically, what property taxes here, whether you have a rental property or whether you're like myself, you own your home, it pays for a couple of things. First of all, it pays for Lee County government. It pays for Lee County mosquito control, very important if you live in this area. It pays for Lee County waterways, and it pays for the Lee County Library. Okay, so when the state of Florida is talking about property taxes, this directly affects Lee County. Now, depending on where you also have your property or live, you can have another city like Cape Coral or the city of Fort Myers, and they have also additional property taxes. It pays for not just the city of Fort Myers as an example, it also pays for the city of Fort Myers stormwater. Okay, so that's the runoff. Those are the sewers that when it rains really hard, it goes into the waterways like the Caloosahatchee. It talks about solid waste, and it also talks about parks. Okay, so if you actually look at your county tax bill, this is all going to be on it, depending on where your property lives or resides. Big issue, public schools. So everybody kind of knows that local property taxes pay for public schools in the area. And then it also, believe it or not, pays for regional things. So whether you're in Lee County or Cape Coral or Fort Myers, you'll have things like the Southwest Florida Everglades Fund, the Okeechobee Basin and waterways. So it's there to preserve, like for instance, the Everglades. It's also there to preserve the Okeechobee Basin and the runoff so that we don't get things like red tide that affects tourism and our beaches and so forth. And obviously waterways, they want to make sure that there's not too much biological growth and that sort of stuff. So all this goes towards when we pay property taxes. All right. But you'll notice that right now nothing goes to the state of Florida. Okay, so the state of Florida, what are they doing? Possibly talking about property management or property taxes and so forth. Well, here's the thing. A little while ago, the state of Florida started getting involved in real estate at the local level. And one of the things that they passed was this idea that when counties and cities were starting to pass all kinds of ordinances towards rental properties, a couple of years ago, literally like 2 years ago, the state of Florida said, whoa, whoa, wait. You guys at the local level do not get to pass something that's against Florida statutes or Florida law. Okay, it's kind of like how the states try to do that nationally, and the U.S. government says, no, no, we have supremacy in that area. So the state of Florida was like, hey, wait a second, guys, you don't get to make up all kinds of local crazy regulations that conflict with Florida law. And when they were looking at the financials of the state of Florida and looking at trying to create affordable housing, they started to realize that part of the problems that they have with affordable housing resided at the local level. So let me show you what the Florida finances are like, and we're going to bring in New York City here. All right, so let me show this off to you real quickly. Over here, you have a budget of the state of Florida. This is the entire state of Florida, and you'll see that in 2021, there was 93 billion. 2022, again, this is when, like right after COVID, 2022, you'll see it goes to 101 billion. 2023 up to 112 billion. 2024, state of Florida goes to 117 billion. It stays the same in 2025, and the budget for Florida for 2026 is actually 2 billion less. Okay. And what they were looking at is, well, okay, what's happening with our population? And basically from 2021 to 2026, on average, the state of Florida is gaining about 300,000 more or less every single year. So we go from just under 22 million in 2021 to 22.3 million to 22.6 million to 23 million in 2024, 23.3 million last year, and it's projected to 23.6. Now, watch carefully what happened in New York. In New York in 2021, they had 177 billion. Now, here's a very important aspect to look at because Florida does look at other states. I want to say that it looks at Colorado here in a second. This is right from the chief financial officer in Florida. So New York in 2021 had 177 billion. That was less than double the state of Florida. But then you notice in 2022, all of a sudden it increased by like 35 billion and it surpasses more than double the state of Florida. Now it's all the way up to 254 billion. I won't keep going through this, but the state of Florida spends less than half than the state of New York in terms of expenses, and it's also 20% more people. So when the state of Florida was looking at its finances and trying to be like frugal, they said, wait a second, we noticed something a little bit interesting going on at the local county level. And what they did was they looked at the Colorado Bill of Rights. It's called Tabor. And the state of Colorado, believe it or not, had something very interesting. Like most states, they said that their state expenses have to equal their revenue. But more specifically, they said we cannot raise our expenses, say like the state of New York, unless it's justified. So what does that mean? They created a formula basically, and they said, listen, if the population increases, we can increase our expenditures, and we can also increase it based on inflation, basically the consumer price index. And we don't get to do it anymore. So if the state of Colorado was like all of a sudden increasing their expenses by 10%, what happened was if they had an excess that year, they could possibly give it back to the taxpayers, or the taxpayers in Colorado could vote to keep that excess, okay? Or if they overspent at the state level, they would have to basically make it up next year and cut back their expenses, okay? So enter the chief financial officer, Blaise Ingoglia. I'll say that just once. I hope I got his name right. And what he did was he said, I'm going to create something called the FAFO. Now, I know that some of you might know that acronym a little bit differently, but what he was talking about was the Florida Agency for Financial Oversight. And he said, listen, we've noticed something very interesting in the state of Florida that after COVID, we had a lot of local government growth. What did he mean by that? He said the local state the local funding or expenditures was 36 billion in 2020, and it rose by 20 billion, well over 50% to 2025. And using that same kind of like thinking, he was like, wait, did all the counties all of a sudden increase by 55%? And when he factored that formula, he goes, wait a second. Basically, based on what's happening, you guys pretty much overspent, according to that basic, simple mathematical formula, $15 billion. $15 billion at the local county level. So there's 67 counties in Florida, and they said basically, hey, I know that we're growing, but you don't increase your local budgets by 55%. That's just government blight. That's just everybody, grabbing at money. It doesn't make any sense. So guess what 15 billion represents in overspending at the county level? He was saying that basically that represents most of what the state of Florida gets from property taxes. Okay. So they were saying the local government's growing fast. How do you fund it? You cut it back to where it should be. You're going to have less expenditures. And how does that affect property taxes? Okay. So again, this isn't like the local counties, charge their own property tax bill, but the state of Florida was now suddenly looking at this and going, hey guys, we want affordable housing for a lot of reasons. How do we solve this? Okay. So what were the actions that they did? First of all, he was saying that in the next 2 years, they've already started. They're auditing financially every single county in the state of Florida. What do? They ask the county for their information. They run it through like kind of like their own parameters. They ask questions. And then what they do is, amazingly, they look at it and they found out, for instance, the bigger counties in the state of Florida, Palm Beach County, they looked at this and they said basically in the last 5 years, you guys have overspent by 344 million. Dade County, they said 302 million, and they've started to go to different counties. And what they would do is they would have a live press conference. So what they would do is they get the results. They would ask the county, hey. We have a couple of questions on this sort of thing, okay? And then what they did is they would come out in the county itself. They would call a press conference. They wouldn't share the results with the county officials, and then they would give the actual result. Okay, so what do they mean by that? Okay, so he was using the example in Dade County, which is where Miami is. In Dade County, they grew by 55,000 people from 2020 to 2025 in 5 years. 55,000 people. And they increased their spending by $1 billion. $1 billion for 55,000 people. They were saying that doesn't make any sense. So to give you an example of what that means, in Lee County, at the same time, 2020 to 2025, we increased our population by 78,000, even more than Dade County. Now, Dade County has 2.7 million people. So they just had 55,000 added to the 2.7 million. But in Lee County, We grew from 760,000. So we're basically roughly a quarter the size. We grew number wise even more, and yet we didn't increase our budget by $1 billion. Okay, so this is where they're kind of coming into, like, financially, where they're coming from. They also said, hey, listen, from now on, we're going to have online transparency so that people in the state of Florida or anywhere else can go look at what you guys are doing. And then he started pushing the state house to pass a bill. So this is where the rubber meets the road. So you see where the state of Florida is coming in and saying, we're watching our budget, we're making sure that things are happening. Local governments, we feel, aren't. What are we going to do about this? So this is where they announced House Bill 203. I even got the legislation to show you that, I like to go to the source and stuff like that. So what does it actually say? You might not be able to read it, but basically the House bill which passed, okay, I'll get to where we are right now today, but the House bill passed, and they said what we want to do is we want to put it in the Florida Constitution. We want to make sure that homesteaded properties, okay, not investment properties, but homesteaded properties only have to pay local school board taxes. Everything else, everything else gone for property taxes for homesteaded properties. Okay. And they also said, as you can see here, if you want to read it or take a screenshot of it, they also said that you cannot reduce police, firefighter, or first responders budget. So, in other words, you can't just start gutting services and so forth and going from there. Okay. So, where do we actually sit with this? Well, right now, it passed the House, but it has not been introduced in the Senate. Okay. So, what does that mean? Well, in the state of Florida, unlike a lot of other states, they're not here all year round. They're here basically in session for 2 months out of the year. So what there's been talk about is having a special session for the Florida state legislature, the Senate, to come back in session and talk about this bill to get it passed. And if it passes, the governor already said he would sign it. Okay. Now you're saying, well, wait a second, Michael, that's good for people that have homestead exemption, meaning people that actually their primary residence is here. And that might sound cool philosophically, but wait a second. What about rental properties? Okay, so he talked about that, and I'm going to get to that in a second, right towards the end. So we're almost ready to wrap up here. Okay, now let's talk about insurance. One of the things that was really interesting that he talked about, he said, in the state of Florida, car insurance has actually gone down, believe it or not. Maybe not for some of us that have kids that are teenagers, okay, but for overall drivers, maybe he said it went down by 8%. But then he said, we have a problem in the state of Florida. He called it the 8876 rule. I said, oh, okay, this is interesting about insurance because you always hear about weird things happening with insurance in Florida. So he's talking about like insurance for rental properties and homeowners insurance. And he said, we have 8% of the US population. We have 8% of the insurance policies nationally in the state of Florida. And we have 76% of insurance claims. And he said, we are looking now very heavily into fraud when it comes to insurance companies. And he said, we're taking it very, very seriously because you said we could talk all we want about property taxes and managing that at the local level. Okay. But he said there's also a problem with insurance. So he was talking about that. And in last year in the state of Florida, 17 new insurance companies came in. Okay. But the results were mixed because some of them were newer and they didn't write a lot of policies. And the results were also mixed in terms of the rates because Citizens, which is the state uh, kind of like insurance company, insurer of last resort, as they call it, went down 8.7%. That's great. But overall, with the private, these guys that are, say, getting sued by people after hurricanes and that, they had an overall 2% increase. So for somebody like myself as a landlord, my insurance rates did not go down, I don't think, for any one of my properties. Okay. So they're aware of it. They're working on it. They're starting to look into fraud. And by the way, if you go to their website, which is the CFO of Florida, they have started arresting people for insurance fraud. They arrested agents. I think there was an attorney that might have been involved. They also, he said, they arrested, criminally charged two government workers that were part of a fraud. I think he said it was insurance fraud, but I'm not entirely sure. So they are looking into this. Okay. So all this has to do with the state of Florida saying, guys, he said specifically, we do not want to become another California and New York. We do not want to have housing that is unaffordable to everybody, that everybody has to leave. We want to make sure that Florida keeps growing, that we control our expenses. That's supposed to happen at the state level, which we can control. And now we're talking about doing it at the local level. Okay. Now, and I'll finish off here, Parrish, and then we can get any other comments and stuff like that. Other comments that he made. Okay, so first of all, he said for people that have homestead exemption, you have something that's called Save Our Homes, and that's where they put a cap of 3% on your property taxes. The reason that this was done many years ago was that they wanted to make sure that people that were living in their home weren't suddenly overpriced by property taxes in particular. So you hear things around the nation where somebody's lived in their home for 40 years and they're forced out because they're on a fixed income and their property taxes have shot through the roof. Okay, so what they did a little while ago in the state of Florida was that they had 3%. That's how much your property taxes can increase only year over year, no matter what's happening in the market, if you have a save or home exemption. In other words, you live in that property. But he says that they're also looking at trying to increase that because they realize that when we passed our Save Our Homes, that the property values have tripled. So when you're talking about an exemption of Save Our Homes and say $50,000, that's great. But if now the average home is 300,000, obviously it doesn't work out the right way. And he also said specifically about rental properties. This is exciting. He said, listen, he said right now, and most people don't know this, but right now the most that property taxes can go up for rental properties is capped at 10%. And the chief financial officer in the state of Florida said there is absolutely no reason why property taxes should increase 10% for anybody in 1 year. He says, once again, this is something where the values shoot up, local governments say start to charge a lot more, and then they start to expand. He says, there's no reason. He says, no reason for it. So they're also looking at reducing the property taxes, the amount that it can climb for even investment properties. But the thing is, are they actually going to get this done this year? So Governor DeSantis wants it. The House of Florida passed it. The question is what's going to happen in the Senate. And I know that a lot of people are pushing for it. So that's in a nutshell of what's happening. So the good news is, and Parrish, if you want, I can take questions and we can bring people on. But basically, the good news is the state of Florida wants to make all homes more affordable. Whether it comes to property taxes, they want to make sure that we don't have bloat by local governments, bloat by the state of Florida. So therefore, the property taxes are going to increase. And I've been through that. Anybody that had the rental properties in 2025, or sorry, 2005, 2008, 2010, where the property value started to go down, and all of a sudden the millage rate, the taxation rate started to go back up. So we weren't really getting any relief. That's exactly what they're talking about. They're saying, hey, listen, we got to control that. We have to control the insurance costs for everybody. We're actively working on it. And that's what they're going to do. And the question is whether the state of Florida this year is going to pass that to the Senate. So, having said that, I hope that I tried to put all that information together for you guys. I hope you found that interesting. Parrish, do we have any questions that I can
I know
take?
Brian typed one in the chat already. If
Sure.
our rentals would be considered homestead.
Okay, great question. So, homestead, no, not unless you live in it. So, homestead, very good question, affects not just your property taxes. Homestead exemption also affects your insurance, as well as a couple of other things, but predominantly your property taxes. So, one, when the state of Florida or any state looks at you having it as a rental property, they see that it's for profit typically, like you're getting tax incentives and so forth like that. So they look at it like we're not going to cap like the expenses when it comes to property taxes, and also if you if you have like an exemption, like a personal exemption, like you're residing there, your insurance also is different. So when you're residing in your home, you might have a lot more for contents than a rental property. Also, theoretically, you might have more for liability, that sort of stuff. When you have a rental property, that those insurance rates should probably go down a little bit depending on how it's structured with like wind mitigation, hurricanes, and sinkhole, and all that sort of stuff. Insurance is very technical, and I'm not an expert on it, but I understand that. So rental properties follow a different pattern for property taxes, property tax exemptions, and also insurance. So does that answer your question, Brian?
Michael,
Yes.
Jay Tarquin here.
Hey, Jay, welcome.
How does the state know I'm renting the property? I know specifically the insurance company. I've done insurance specifically for rental.
Introducing the
Yeah, absolutely. So Jay, so great question. I know there was a little bit of background interference and stuff like that. So how does the state of Florida know that you have a rental property versus homesteaded? They basically don't. So first of all, for somebody like myself that lives here in Lee County and has like owns a home, and that's my actual like where I live, right? There's a couple of ways they do it. Every year they ask that you file an exemption. Okay. And what I means by that is it's pretty good actually. But what they do is they send it to you by mail and they're basically saying, hey, listen, like last year in 2025 or 2024, you had a homestead exemption, meaning that you live there, that's your primary residence, and so they mail it off to you. If you don't ever file that exemption, they won't automatically give it to you. So they realize that it's either a secondary home for you and you live somewhere else, whether it's United States or elsewhere, or it's a rental property. Okay. Now, technically, maybe what you could also look at too, Jay, is that if you're looking at it, so let's just say that you were in a your primary residence, and let's just say you got a job transfer and you went somewhere else. They don't really necessarily have the ability to determine now that it's a rental property. Okay. But like they say, if you're getting tax benefits for rental property that you're not really residing in as your primary residence, that's where obviously they'll consider fining you. You have to pay back taxes and that sort of stuff. So it's a very good question. They technically don't know about that unless you kind of submit certain forms, either asking for that homestead exemption, or if you change your insurance and you fill out like property tax appraiser stuff for rental property, then they might know it's a rental property. Does that answer your question, Jay?
Yeah, I didn't realize that how they handled it for the homestead. I don't live in mine,
Okay.
so I never came across that. But you one of your presentation slides was that there's a 3% cap on the increase for residents, and there's a 10% cap on rentals.
Right.
And I was just curious how they would know a rental from any other. What if it's a vacation home?
Exactly.
They
Well,
would
see,
have
this is, and just on that point alone, Jay, like, so for instance, in some parts of Lee County, like Cape Coral, now even in Punta Gorda, they have a rental registry for seasonal or annual rentals. So what the local county governments are doing, and this is exactly what the state of Florida is talking about, is they're asking for like permits exactly what you're saying, the track. So when somebody leaves and they leave trash in the yard or there's an eviction, like Cape Coral was like, well, we want to know who to call. Like, is this managed? Is this a single family home that's like the owner's leaving, or is it a renter? Like, how do
yeah,
we manage this? So they're trying to, in a lot of places around the United States, have these registries where they know whether it's a rental property, and sometimes they break it down as it's seasonal or is it annual rental? So they have it in Bonita Springs, Cape Coral, and Punta Gorda as an example.
yeah. Now the thing about these taxes, there's all kinds of rentals down there.
Mhm.
I'm renting through you, of course, with a lease, and my tenant is, he's in the community. His family, his kids go to school there. Uh, the least people that can afford a raise in rent because of taxes are them. You know,
Right.
more than a property owner. But I, I'm also hearing, these Airbnbs popping up all over the place. That's technically a rental, also.
Yes.
So, uh, do they differentiate on that? Probably not.
Well, some people do, some people don't. And it depends on a lot of
No, I
things.
mean the state.
The state, oh, yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. So a seasonal rental, whether it's a renting, like as they call it, a vacation rental, which typically means like you might rent it for a short period of time,
Right.
like a weekend or something like that, versus a seasonal rental, which might be more like a month or 2 months. Absolutely, the state of Florida looks at this as that you are basically having your own personal hotel slash motel,
Exactly.
and you have to pay state sales tax to the state of Florida.
Yeah.
So one of the things that happens at Red Fortress and we don't do seasonal rentals is in part because of that and because it follows under a totally different set of real estate laws. Okay, so the state of Florida definitely says you have a seasonal or vacation rental, you better register with us. Okay,
I see.
annual
Okay.
rentals they don't. Annual rentals, they don't. Now, local
Okay.
jurisdictions, however, they do have a little bit more, like I said, Bonita, Cape Coral, and sometimes like Cape Coral will say your annual like just came into law this year or last year, I should say 2025 in October. Basically, they said, hey, for Cape Coral rental properties, if you're an annual, you have to pay a $35 fee. I know Parrish was very involved with working with the city of Cape Coral lady. That was like, the kind of administrator of that program. And then it's $350 a year if it's a vacation slash seasonal rental. So some jurisdictions do differ between annual and seasonal. The state of Florida definitely does it for seasonal rentals. There's no tax on annual rentals in the state of Florida. And now there's no tax even on commercial rentals. They got rid of it a year ago. So Florida is definitely getting its financial house in order and trying to make things very streamlined.
Good. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Jay. Good to have you here. Anybody else?
Okay.
Hi, this is
I have a
Joanne.
question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Whoever. No, it's all right.
Go
We'll get
first.
to
You're
you.
first. Go ahead. It's okay.
Okay. Uh, Hi, Michael. This is Chris Levette.
Hey,
I
Chris.
have a question. I'm in Lee County, and I looked at my tax history up until the 2026 year, and I noticed that regardless of property values, which we've had a dip, maybe I don't know, mine went down about maybe 30%, but it's come back up a little bit. But what I noticed was that the the taxes continually go up every single year, regardless of value. Do we, as being in the county, do we have any recourse as far as appealing it, or just saying, hey, property values have gone down. Why are my taxes going up? Or is it just a waste of time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're definitely asking a very, very specific question, and some of
Some of
which,
which,
yeah, it's great. So first of all, there's a couple of things you can do. So you can actually appeal the property value at Lee County. There's a special court. It's a like a magistrate, okay, where you can go in and say, I don't think that my property value is 400,000. There's no way I'd be able to sell it for even 280,000. But here's what most people don't know about property taxes. And I talked with the previous property tax appraiser about this. So what happens when they are looking at property taxes? They take everything that happens on January 1, sales in your area, and they go all the way through December 31. Okay. And when we're in a down cycle, what happens is all of a sudden your home that used to be worth 300,000 is now you maybe couldn't sell it for 250,000. And yet the property appraised value of your home might be really high. It might be like 290,000. And you're like, wait a second, it's not worth 290,000. We're in a down market. And now what they do is they look at all the comparables over the last year. They average them out. They kind of come up with a square footage basis. And then they times it by zero point 0.9 with the idea that they're taking 10% off the top and giving it to you as a kind of like value. So they're saying, well, we know that we might be over or something like that, but we're going to take 10% off. Okay, so that's how it works. So what was happening in like 2006, as an example, and I was here at the same desk, unfortunately, in 2006, when things were going south, that's what happened. You had these huge like increases, like 40% year over year. Like my property's worth 200,000, now it's worth 280,000, now it's worth 320,000. And then what happened was it started to go down. And people were like, wait, like my property, my home isn't worth 320,000. I'd love to be able to sell it for 320,000, but now it's worth like 200,000. And it took literally a year and a half for the property values to kind of come down to where it was more in line with what was happening. So what happens in our area in Southwest Florida versus almost any other area in Florida, actually, Southwest Florida is known for very much a boom bust cycle we go up very high, then all of a sudden we come down very hard, and then we start coming up, and then like we have a hurricane or stuff like that. It affects our supply, and then all of a sudden we're building, and then like homes are valued more and more, and then we overbuild like we are, and then we start to go down. So the first thing you could do as a summation is Chris, is one you could theoretically go to Lee County Court through a magistrate and say, listen, this doesn't make any sense. The second thing that you can do is obviously contact your representative and say, listen, Um, I don't like how the Lee County government's spending their money. Like obviously, I'm facing a lot of financial hardship, like a lot of other people with these property taxes, especially like if you have investment properties and you're always talking about affordable housing, and yet, like you're saying, Chris, they adjust the millage rate to keep going up so that the income of Lee County, say, doesn't go down that much. Charlotte County or anything else like that. So you can actually call a Lee County representative, your Lee County representative in your district, and bring it to her attention. And ultimately, it is about elections. It is about like, so if these guys are just like voting to build like 17, I don't know, libraries everywhere and do all kinds of things with the money, at some point you have to call them out and say, hey, listen, our real estate is going down. Why is it that like if my real estate value goes down like 30%, you're not reducing the size of the county government? And that's exactly what the CFO of Florida was talking about. Yeah, they don't lower
Okay.
the millage rates. There's not as much tax relief, and that's what they're talking about, blight and government, local government getting bigger and bigger, just like any state or federal government can. So, does that answer your question,
Okay.
Chris?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
thanks, Michael.
Good, my pleasure. Great question. Okay.
Hey, Michael, this is Jim Wingaston.
Hi. Welcome.
Hey. So I guess, over the next, say, 5 years, with what's going on here, is it a reasonably safe assumption that, you'll probably have roughly stagnant insurance costs, that they'll probably let insurance do most of the, so let inflation do most of the chiseling and probably with other taxes as well. We'll probably be going to a stagnant phase here for a while.
Yeah, you're talking more like about rental properties and so forth, right? Like,
Yeah.
sure, like comparative, and that's yeah, this is exactly what they're looking at. So I would say so. I'm thinking that right now. It's probably going to be, I said this about 6 months ago, it would be about 2 years. I still think it might be a year and a half to 2 years before we see a certain level of absorption in terms of what we've been building. And then that's when you're going to start seeing some of the rental rates go up. Now, there's a lot of things that go into the rental rates. Okay. So part of it is that natural supply and demand, right? Like how many rental properties are available on the market versus, how many people are looking for them. But there's two other things that are very important. One is the unemployment rate. And the other is basically, if you want, you can use the term cash flow or discretionary income of people like renters. Okay. So what I mean by that is, let me give you an example back of what was happening in 2004 and five. So we were having like 20% increases year over year with our property value, meaning if you bought your home for 200,000, all of a sudden it's now worth 240,000. Then next year it's worth 280,000, and everybody is excited. All of a sudden you're $80,000 richer for owning your home. But like I was explaining to people, this is not sustainable.
No.
Right. It's like a very simple, and part of the way they're like, well, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean it can't keep going up? I said, well, there's no way that people who live here and work here locally can sustain that. So can the average maintenance guy get paid an extra 10 to 20% year over year with their salary? Can the average server or school teacher or firefighter or whatever? So eventually there's going to be that hit, like you're saying about rentals. So that the unemployment rate, do people have money, as well as like their discretionary income affects directly the rent, as in addition to obviously the supply and demand that we normally have. So I think it's going to take 2 years from what I'm seeing right now, or maybe a year and a half before we start kind of getting like the amount of available rentals down. And then when we start doing that, that's when you're going to start seeing the rent going up, all things being equal. Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. And so I hope that answers your question. And then, like, here's the thing that I've said before. Um, Over a 10-year period in modern history in the state of Florida, meaning, say, going back to, say, let's just say 1980, okay, over a 10-year period, at no time in Lee County has a property ever gone down in value over a 10-year period. So if you go from 1980 to 1990, your property value increased, short of I don't know, the house burning down or getting utterly flooded, right? So if it was a regular home, nothing happens to it, it's going to increase in value. Same thing, 1990 to 2000, 2000 to 2010, 2010 to 2020. So when you look at it and you say, well, geez, 3 years ago my home was worth X amount of dollars. You're right, it's gone down, but what's it going to be like in 2030? And short of something massive, happening, your properties will be worth more today. So that's why I always say to people that I know that we're going to go lower with rent, but overall, if you buy and hold your property, it's going to be worth more in 2 to 3 years. So I think it's going to be about 2 years myself. Some areas maybe less. We'll see. And if I'm wrong, you can point this out to me and let me know. Okay. Great question. Anything else, guys?
There is a question from Brian in the chat.
Sure.
Can Red Fortress provide references to
Yeah.
insurance companies and banks willing to give preferred rates and service to clients of Red Fortress?
That's great. Great question, Brian. So I can't say that banks are necessarily going to give us a better rate because even though we're one of the larger management companies in the area, banks tend to be, much larger much larger in focus than we are as a single business. Insurance companies, it's a very good question. I do know of a couple of insurance agents that I've worked with in the past that might be able to get you some better rates. Here's the thing, insurance companies are always changing their rates. And literally, it doesn't matter who your insurance agent is, every year they basically should shop your rental property for a different rate. Now, here's the caveat to that. When they shop it and you find somebody like lower, you might have to do a 4-point inspection. Okay. And then that could eat into the profits that you would save going to a different insurance company, and it might also affect the insurance company's rate because the 4-point inspection looks at the roof and everything else like that. So I could refer you to a couple of agents that I think that are good. I think they're very good for customer service, generally speaking. I can't say for sure that they're the cheapest rate that you've ever seen, but we could do it because we have referred some people to the insurance company, and that we don't get anything from that financially. We just think that if we can provide you with a vendor that gives you a great service, then we're doing you, a solid one. Okay, so great question. All right, anything else?
The chat is clear.
The chat is clear. Well, listen, guys, I appreciate your time. Great questions. I really do appreciate this.
I think we have one.
Rose, go ahead.
Question down
Quick. It appears that the building that's been going on in Florida was all condominiums. Are they phasing out single-family homes now?
Great question. Okay, Rose. So there's a reason why we don't build any more trailer park communities in Florida. And the reason why is because the land is too expensive. Okay. So you might be able to do something maybe in the Panhandle, but even there, Florida, like I said, a lot of people are coming to it. So the problem is the land. So I wouldn't say that they're necessarily phasing out a single family home building. I think what's happening is because of the value of the land, a builder is looking at one of two things. They're either going to try and build like a really big home. So if the land's expensive, they could try to maximize the size of the home so they make more money. There's more profit in building like a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home if they can than a 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. Okay. And then likewise, if they can't do that, or alternatively, they might try and do multifamily or condos or that sort of stuff. Now, some people like the idea of being in a condo association where things are a little bit more regulated and so forth. But I wouldn't say that right now there's a rush to build more condos versus single family homes. I think what the issue is multifamily and the cost of the land and where it's being built. So for instance, in Lehigh, where the land is a little bit cheaper, it's they do a lot of single family home building and duplexes. You don't see a lot of condos going up in Lehigh. But in other areas, like as Parrish knows, right by our office, we have a multifamily, like 114 unit apartment community. I didn't even know that they could actually build something that big on that plot of land. I could literally pick up a baseball and almost hit it from this office. And they built it on a very small piece of land because it's like expensive and they wanted to maximize it. So it's a great question, but I don't think that they're choosing condos over single family homes. I think it's more the question of the land and whether they can buy enough of it and then try to maximize the units on it. Does that answer your question, Rose? That good? All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I appreciate your time, everybody. Again, if you have a topic, if you want to follow up, maybe something a little bit later, you have a question on, please feel free to email me at mike@redfortresspm.com. That comes right to me. And again, for a lot of these things, maybe next time you can't you don't have time to show up for this. There's a conflict. You can always look and sign up at our YouTube page, our Facebook, LinkedIn. We post a recording of this and the synopsis on our website and all these other social media stuff. So again, I try to do topics that I think are relevant to me as a landlord, as well as you guys as clients. So if you have a topic, let me know and we'll do something on it. And I'll do the research on it. So any final questions, Parrish, before we head out for the night?
Clear in the chat, unless anyone else has any questions.
Oh, going once.
Looks clear.
Going twice. All right, everyone. I appreciate you guys as clients. I appreciate people that showed up here. Good to see Ed here as well and Parrish from our office. So, guys, have a great evening and we'll see you next time. Look forward to
Thanks,
it.
Michael.
Thank you.
My pleasure,
Have a
guys.
good day.
Thanks,
Bye.
you too. Take care, guys. Appreciate it. Bye
Bye.
bye.